basketball and all the other things going on in the world. I told Ellen and Heather I often don't do a biographical introduction. I think let's get right to it. Houston's a small town, and I think you know these wonderful artists, but I will say I met Ellen many years ago through the Block program at the Augusta. I see many of the former Block people that I worked with. And Heather is someone I've been wanting to spend time with for years because I discovered through an internet wormhole about her motorcycle travel through South America. I feel like we have a lot to talk about over dinner. We haven't done that yet, so this will be our preamble to a longer dinner. But I wanted to start actually with a little piece of text that I make as an offering to start our conversation. I'm reading a short paragraph from Shimmer, When All You Love Is Being Trashed, by Deborah Bird Rose, from the book The Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. One of the great utterances of other species in this beautiful ascent is this beautiful ascent to life. We have a word for it in English. It is the great expressive, demonstrative yes. Let us consider the lush, extravagant beauty, flamboyance, and dazzling seductiveness with which eucalypts say yes. They burst open sequentially, and when they burst, every branch and twig says, yes, more! More buds, more flowers, more color, more scent, more pollen, more nectar, more, and all that can be conjured from within the tree to reach out into the world with this great, vivid, multisensorial call, yes. And for their part, the flying foxes come racing to respond. Their yes includes their long tongues that are perfectly adapted to sucking up nectar and their delicate whiskers that pick up pollen and distribute over 70% of it intact. They carry eucalypt futures on their furry little faces. And across the patchy and increasingly fragmented landscapes of contemporary Australia, the renewal of woodland and forest life hinges on the specific yes. We humans, too, can be saying yes. There is a fantastically large set of contexts within which to say yes. But to stay with the flying foxes, it is clear that to celebrate the lives of flying foxes is to say yes to eucalypts, and thus to say yes to dry, sclerophyll woodlands and to rainforests. It is to say yes to photosynthesis and to say yes to oxygen. Why would one not? We breathe in, we breathe out. In this world of connectivity, we live to celebrate another day and to experience life's shimmer as it comes forth in our lives with all manner of tears, happiness, grief, commitment, love, exuberance, and celebration. Of course, we humans are part of it. The waves of ancestral power that shimmer and grab are also exactly the relationships that bring us forth and sustain us. The kiss of life is an ancestral blessing, alive, brilliant, and pulsating in the world around us and within us. I hope that you'll go find this book. It's worth it. Yes. At this moment. Arts of Living on a Damaged Planet. Yes, I heard that.
Thank you for starting this off.
Yes.
Love it.
Well, I think I also, as we sit together in front of a group of friends and colleagues, I want to mention Throughline as well, which of course is a context within which we are sitting, but is a collaborative effort to say yes and to make an effort to share space in a time when that is harder and harder to do. It's always hard to maintain a physical space for artists, and even harder, I often think, to make collaborative exhibitions. And we'll talk about what we mean when we say collaborative exhibitions. I don't think it's a simple one thing. But I think to make an effort at doing over and over again two-person exhibitions in a physical space in Midtown Museum District, Houston, is an emphatic yes that I want to applaud as well. Houston has a number of spaces like this with different kinds of motives and models, but it's important to celebrate and support them when we get a chance to. Yeah? Okay, so let's talk about that two-person part of this show. This show is called Triage. We spent a little bit of time together walking through the space, And the first thing I asked you when we talked was, could you tell me about your idea of collaboration and communication in this show? Where is collaboration happening? Where is it not? You both have very individual practices that sometimes blend and often sit beside each other in very poetic ways. And I think I'll start with you, Heather, if you don't mind. Could you talk a bit about collaboration in this project?
Well, with Ellen, it actually goes back a couple of years because most of our communication has been just through witnessing each other's work over time. We were introduced to each other through Instagram, yay. We recognized something in each other's work, and that gave us the impetus to actually step outside of our normally very isolated, well, I can speak for myself, normally very isolated shell, and reach out and make a relationship happen. And Ellen was very eager to do that as well. And we started, well, Ellen invited me to participate in the studio visits that she had already had going on with a couple of other colleagues. And this gave us a chance to see like the very raw beginnings of our ideas. And it kind of went on from there. We aspired to do a two-person exhibition. We weren't ready for that at that time. But then, when Throughline fell into our laps, then all of a sudden, this way was paved for us to do something together. Yeah. So in terms of collaboration itself, aside from, the relationship that we established through that, we both work very independently. We're both, I think I can safely say that we both share the need for solitude in our practices. But we've always made a point of checking in with each other, maybe once a month, finding out what our mutual insecurities are, what our strengths are, how we can work together despite, very divergent ideas and sort of priorities and methods in the way that we work. So that it's just been a gradual chip away type process. It's been a gradual build with a lot of serendipity towards this. And I'll also say that even the layout of this show, we were both making work till the very last minute.
What? That never happened.
No.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, we laid out the show several times, but of course it's never going to be exactly what you predict it to be, right? But I think it just worked. I think that we listen to each other, we respect each other's spaces, and we know how to give way and recognize when the other needs something that we might not. Maybe I want that myself, but you know what? Maybe she needs it more, or maybe the show is better served by a particular decision that favors the other. So.
Yeah, collaboration is about that balance of justice, sort of, just the balance of expression, I'll say, so that each person feels they have a balance of the expression.
As you were communicating with one another about this show, were there moments where you saw your practices join together or diverge very dramatically or subtly, as it may be?
Yeah, sure. I think you can see that important to both of our practices is drawing and line work. You see amazing line work in Heather's embroideries, stitching work, and line work through both of our drawings. So, and then in the materiality. So I think the most obvious places where our work is similar is in our materialities that we choose, and sometimes in our color palettes as well. But then where we diverge, I think, comes from our personal backgrounds. We have very different personal backgrounds, and we've heard about Heather's very intense relationship with motorcycle and machinery and her deep knowledge of this and interest in that. And, you know, for me, I have had a spiritual practice since childhood. I was raised by, you know, by a set of two parents, but our mother was the spiritual guide. And it has been a part of my life for, you know, really, since I was a child, to spend time in prayer and spend time on my knees and spend time in silence. And that really drives my practice. As I have, you know, gotten older, certainly in the last 12 years, my faith practice has expanded. I spend a lot of time in meditation and in silence, and that really does drive the work, that spiritual rooting. So I think that, you know, that maybe speaks to where we diverge a little bit. And certainly not to say that Heather's work is devoid of spirituality, because that's certainly not true.
I think anyone who's ever been on a motorcycle spends a lot of time praying. But I hear what you're saying. Speaking of
Spirituality comes in different ways,
yeah,
right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of machinery, I actually would like you to describe the body of work that's right behind us over here briefly, if you don't mind, because I want to, if you can just tell us a very brief description of that work. I want to think about the materiality that you're mentioning, but also connect that back to this machinery question and spirituality, and bodies in particular.
Well, the imagery that is embroidered, so it's a collection of basically found used scraps of fabric from work clothes that have a lived-in history, or if they don't have a lived-in history, they've been touched and thought of and used and worked through and had ideas attached to it by some other person, which to me, I relate to that like skin. I relate to the forms of all of these kind of monochromatic scraps as being a little bit like you know, rolling hills. I think of a landscape. You know, I was aiming for a landscape, but the dimensionality, the textures, and even the grass. You know. One of the pieces in this collection over here is a shirt that I deliberately stitched inside out because the threads, you know, are raw and bare and they prickle almost. So that's one aspect of it. The other is that these are parts that are meant to set up some uncomfortable relationships. There are a combination of drill bits and machinery from oil and gas, different oil and gas sites. There are also monitor wells, schematics that I took from the Brio Superfund site repository. And all of these forms are made to pierce the land in some way or another, either for the benefit of measuring toxins that benefits us, that benefits people, because it informs us of what's going on, but also to do the opposite, to drill and to penetrate. And I paired these designs with others that feel to me very similar in terms of how they might feel when they're imposed on us. There are designs of restraints used in dental processes. There are, there are references to medical braces and medical equipment that may be used to cure a thing, but they hurt. So these are the things that I was thinking about when I was making that collection, which it's been a couple of years. I started that about 2 years ago, 2023. It's a combination of hand-stitched and machine-stitched embroidery. There are words that you will see if you look hard enough that underlay the schematics, and those words are references to chemicals, to oil and gas derived chemicals, drugs, numbing agents, and painkillers.
And I think that that body of work, even though quite distinct, has such an interesting relationship to the sculptural installation across from it. And so I'm going to ask you the same thing. Would you mind just describing the sculpture that's on this back wall? And then a bit about one of the, as you were talking about discomfort and pairing different technologies, I've been thinking about the discomfort of something that's supposed to hold water but isn't able to. And so start with telling us just a bit about this body of work.
Sure,
right
absolutely. I will start with the title. It's the piece in the back with the non-viable water, in the front I should say, with non-viable water vessels and the video in the center. The title of the piece is Water Follies. A folly being, of course, a mistake, and very specifically a wasteful mistake. This was the first piece that I conceptualized when I began making the work for the show. And in the early stages of the research, I was thinking about and reading about how early civilizations formed around water sources, of course, out of necessity. Water is essential for life, a vital resource. And so communities, societies formed around natural water sources, and as populations grew, people were forced to live further and further away from the water sources, and technologies came about like the aquifers and systems for storing and harvesting and storing rainwater and that kind of thing. But all along that time, the necessity for a water vessel was essential. It was an essential role, and there were water bearers in these communities that would bring the water in to be used. And when I was thinking about that, I was just thinking about how crucial it was then to have a good water vessel that would serve you, and that would be a very prized possession, that you had that, and a necessity. And then when I fast forward to today, and I think about how it's easy for us to think that water is just an endless source. When I thought about stripping the functionality away of the water vessel, making it a non-viable water vessel, it was a way for me to kind of respond to how far we have come away from that frame of mind of how vital a resource water is to us, because it's, we can turn on our faucet and it just comes out, and we can decide we're done drinking this and just pitch it,
So can you tell us just materially how you made these non-viable? Like, what are they made of?
Yeah.
For anyone who doesn't know yet.
The process started with me just making drawings. I would put paper up on my work wall, and I just, stream of consciousness, made drawings about water. So images of water pooling and streaming and flowing. I went to mythology and did work about the starless rivers, which are rivers that flow underground in mythology, but also there are actually some. And just water in general, fish, creatures, kelp, all kind of imagery. And then I deconstructed them and made the water vessels out of those drawings. And then there are some natural ingredients, natural materials in there as well. Leaves and dried flowers, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in both those bodies of work, there's something to be said about fragility and touch and the body and discomfort as well, pain or discomfort. And just a very broad question, but I'd love to know how you reflect on fragility and touch in particular. And I'm looking at that body of work, but it's kind of a broader question than that as well.
Well, I mean, it starts from emotions, I mean, I think that with the work that I make, I start in a place of, listening to the vulnerabilities that I'm bringing into whatever it is that I'm doing. And so I really want to reflect that. I get a lot of satisfaction, in fact, from reflecting some of the things that aren't necessarily so comfortable. And then I go from there. So yeah, I wanted that to be raw and tactile. In the past, I would make these. I've been making these embroideries, these hand stitch things for a long time, and I would always stitch on linen, you know, and then they would be nice and neat in a rectangle, and I put it in a frame, you know. I just did not feel like in this case that would really speak to what I was trying to. It wouldn't fall flat. So I wanted skin. I wanted torn skin. I also wanted to reference the labor that that goes into some of these different processes that are referenced in the embroideries as well. I mean, there's one of those is on a scrub, a set of scrubs, a top from a set of scrubs. Another is a stain, an apron that is a work apron that's really strangely stained. And then there's work pants, and then my partner Henry, you know, graciously has given me many of his old work clothes, and I've used them. So does that answer your question, or does that sort of circle around it?
Both, we can do both. And that brings me in a way to the title of the show, which is Triage, right? Which is a kind of response to acute emergency and an attempt to stem that emergency in some way. How did you come to that title?
It was a process. Because we had been talking for so long about having a two-person show, we had kind of a working title that was very different, that sort of guided us in our work. And then, somewhat close to the show, we decided the title, for various reasons, was not going to work for us. And we came upon Triage because we wanted to imbue a sense of urgency into the topic, into this need for there to be some repair in the human and non-human worlds. You know.
We needed something simple too.
Yeah.
Something, you know, succinct. It took us a long time to come up with a decent title. I mean, we really worked over. We worked ourselves into a tizzy.
We had some titles that were this long.
Yeah, it was painful.
Yeah.
But
It was the only painful part of the process for me anyway. Was what are we going to name this show? And it's like, okay.
And we were what? We were like how many weeks out before we had to come up with a press release? Like a week, if that.
I mean, yeah. I'm getting in a tizzy thinking about it.
Ellen came up with it. But yes, it's awesome.
As you've been thinking about this work, I'm curious, with that title, how you think about artists responding to navigating despair and an emergency. And we had an interesting conversation about this the other day where I asked you, is it about affect for you? Is it about kind of having a visceral response in your viewer? Or are there actionable steps in the world that you want people to be thinking about? And it doesn't have to be either or, it could be both, it could be neither. But what have you been reflecting on in terms of despair, in terms of emergency, in terms of the state of the world as you make this show? And I don't mean just broad statements about how terrible everything is. I mean, tell me how you think about artists responding in actionable ways or in visceral ways to emergency. I think that's the question your title provokes, right? And so I'm turning to you first, but
Yeah.
Well, so I thought I thought about this for a while. You know, I don't think that what is going on in the world right now is so enormous and frankly overwhelming that, you know, I've been quite paralyzed by it, frankly. I spent a lot of time thinking. I mean, we came up with the idea for this show before the election, and you know, things have changed, as they always do. And I went through a period where I'm like, is this adequate? Is this an adequate thing to be making work about in this moment? Is it enough? Is there a point to it? So there's a period of grief and of just flat out devastation and shell shock and silence. And I frankly think that it's important to process that and be okay with that and allow that to sit and this is okay, because this is valid. It might not be a grand political statement, it might not be these things that it doesn't come up to the level of urgency that it's right now for me. But it is honest. It addresses emotions that, for me, in my case, are at the heart of all the decisions that I make or have made that may have been a part of the situation in some way or other. I don't know. I mean, I think that one has to start there. Start with yourself, and then move outward and build out from the core, and be open to relationships and other people's points of view, and then eventually, if you're lucky, you build a network of people, and then you can really do something.
Do you want me to turn that same question at you?
Sure, that's fine, yeah. Do you want to phrase the question again so that I make sure I'm addressing the actual question and not just
I'm going to reframe it based on what Heather has been saying.
Sure.
I think this question about adequacy, is the work enough in the world, is one that can be paralyzing for many artists, and I don't think should be necessarily, but it's a real question that people have. And so how do you think about the role of the individual artist as you're making, how do you think about your role as you make work in the world?
Sure. Okay, thank you. You mentioned about actionable steps that we can take. And when I think about what is my role as an artist, it's about communication. And as Heather kind of mentioned, yes, there are people out there doing the hard work of activism, doing the hard work of changing policy, bringing about changes, or blasting out scientific information, political information, etc., to keep us all informed. That does not get received by everyone. Everyone does not appreciate that language sometimes. And so artists have this opportunity to communicate the same things in a different way. I communicate through my visual work. I communicate through objects and drawings to speak to things that I feel very deeply. And it's my way of holding a signpost or throwing my fist in the air. And it speaks to a different audience, perhaps. And I think that's part of what artists are about. I think that's what we're called to do, is speak in the way that we know how, and allow others to speak in the way they know how. And it's like a different language. And it falls on different, it's received by different people in different ways. Yeah. Does that answer that question?
Absolutely. Does it answer for you?
Yeah, it does. I'm good with it.
I really, all things get lumped together, and actually slowing down enough to see, okay, grief is one thing, and activism is one thing, and art making is one thing, or multiple things, but a different body of things. And art is not the same as repair necessarily, but perhaps deals with repair, or perhaps deals with ideas of how we might repair differently than a scientist might repair. And we had great conversations also about the specificity of Houston for this body of work. In particular, I'm looking here at this handmade paper with seeds in it, right? And this very research-driven body of work that's engaging with a specific Houston community and will expand to other Houston communities. But I want to ask you a question about Houston, and I'm going to probably ask just a broad question, which is how you describe this work from this place. How do you think about Houston in this body of work?
Yeah, gosh. Because my work is so much about connectivity, how we connect to each other and how we connect to, humans connecting to the non-human world. I think Houston is interestingly positioned.
Mm-hmm.
We are in between Sam Houston National Forest to the north and the Gulf of Mexico to the south. And those are two really significant wild spaces that we have access to. With not a lot of effort, we can get there. And in between, we have covered a lot of it up with cement and billboards. But because of our geographic location, the humidity and precipitation, there's still a lot of green, a lot of living life in amongst the cement and billboards. Like any bird drops any seed in a crack of the cement, it's going to grow. So we have access to a lot of non-human living spaces right around us. And I think it's important. It's one of my actionable steps and hopes that we would take the steps to create and nurture relationships with non-human living life beings that are around us, because humans take care of things that they care about. And when we just look at it as a scrubby old bush on the side of the road, rather than a host for living organisms, or an oxygen generating machine, a tree that generates oxygen and absorbs carbon and provides shelter and food for living beings. It's when we have that perspective, we care. We care. And so I think Houstonians have a really vast opportunity to nurture that relationship. It's just a matter of having a conversation and getting people to come awake to that. Because, we're busy. We're flying down the highway, and we're not thinking of that scrubby bush on the side of the road as being a home for a creature or multiple creatures. We're, worried about getting where we're going.
Well, and what's nice is you have many people in the room who actually are thinking about that. So
Sure,
you've got
sure.
actually an audience of people who are very engaged in that set of questions.
Yeah.
And in a few minutes, I'm going to open that up so they can ask questions back to us as well. But Heather, this is so embedded in Houston as well, and so I'm asking you that broad question. But how are you thinking about Houston with these bodies of work and this show?
Well, it comes out of a mixture of old personal struggles with Houston and a kind of newfound love for it. I spent my adolescent years here a long time ago. And I returned to Houston only, 8 years ago, I think. It was in 2016, after the trip that I made. When I was a child, I did not fit in. I felt completely alienated from everything. I was living in a distant suburb. It was very different from the life that I had been living prior to being here. It was the opposite in many ways. I grew up moving around a lot. But since I've been here, despite the fact that Houston is a car-driven place, and despite how isolated people tend to be, as a result of the infrastructure itself, as a result of the necessity of driving, of having air conditioning, of moving about, in these little sort of nuclei, it's hard for us to kind of find natural organic ways to commute because we don't walk down the street, You know, we don't hang out in the same places. Maybe we hang out in bars or churches, but they're far apart from one another, etc. So I found I found a love for people. I mean, I made friends here that I'll have for the rest of my life. And so I discovered an investment, a need to invest love in this place. And so these two bodies of work come out of the 8 years of being here and developing fascinations with the issues, the environmental issues, and the inequity issues, and the gentrification, stratification, class, race issues that, you know, stem from the way that we live. And I decided to make a project that would involve many, many different things. It would involve collecting refuse. It would involve making drawings. It would involve a lot of research. It would involve trying to get to know people, using newspaper stories if I couldn't find people, and paying homage to some of the tragedies that have resulted from the choices that's from some of the things that Houston's built on that we just spoke of. So, you know, I feel like I'm really invested here in a much more meaningful way than I would be anywhere else. Despite the discomforts, despite the heat, the mosquitoes, and all of these things, despite the pollution and the billboards, I'm invested and I love it, and I love people here. And the other thing that I want to say that is amazing, despite the isolation, is that people find each other. People find each other. The artists in this city find each other. The musicians. You know, there's an incredible crossover between different media here. You know, you have this amazing experimental sound scene here that crosses over between the visual art scene and the music scene. You know, you don't see that everywhere else. And there's a passion with that. And I think that it's because people recognize, because of the rest of it, the need to fight for that. So that's what this is. The paper is a byproduct of that as well. You know, this, by the way, these big pieces of paper, they're handmade. They're made of a combination of household cardboard and just regular waste, and waste materials, refuse that I've collected from around industrial toxic sites. And they're embedded with all kinds of history, environmental history and personal history and history that I've found.
I think it's a beautiful answer, and I know a lot of the people in the room, and you know, I left this city 5 years ago and then realized, oh wait a minute, this isn't like every other place. And some of my friends for life that I met here are here today, and that's why I came back. So it's really beautiful to hear you describe it in that way. The last question I'll ask you before we kind of open it up for a broader conversation is, and I always ask this in every studio visit I ever do, which is, what are you reading? And how are you sustaining your practice and taking care of your practice at this moment in time, roughly? So let's start with you, Ellen.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take the opportunity to mention that reading is important to both of our practices, and in the gift shop we put out our sort of exhibition libraries. It's just kind of a collection of books that we both have read, not that we both have read everyone, but
you selected together, yeah.
And then we've created a relationship with Basket Books in town. So if you haven't been there, they graciously have put together a table that is many of our favorite books that we used for researching this. So go to Basket, pick up some of our favorite titles. Thank you for that little announcement. What I'm reading right now, I'm reading Playground by Richard Powers. Richard Powers, maybe you know him from Overstory, which is a fictional book where and Playground is this way. He creates fictional characters, about lives that are actually happening or have happened in history or happening now and impacting society. Overstory was about trees, and Playground is about water. I'm also reading Thoughts That Move Energy by Julie Merrick, and I'm not as far into that one as I would like to be, but I've been a little busy. So in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be reading that one ravenously. But then I have books that I just pick up all the time that I keep around me, and I just have them marked, and I flip through, and that's almost anything by Robert McFarlane, but especially Underland. David Abrams' Spell of the Sensuous. Gosh, there's a lot of beautiful writing in there. Robin Wall-Kimmerer, gorgeous writing about our relationships, the non-human world. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. Boy, oof. Okay, so my books are a little bit more morose. The one that I keep coming back to that is really painful and very hard to get through and so philosophically dense that I don't understand probably 90% of it. But it's Powers of Horror by Julia Kristeva, which is something that reflects it is the one piece of information, thing, what have you, creative act by another that most directly addresses this kind of contradiction that comes from what she described as objection, but is disgust, is repulsion, is complexity of those deep, deep, uncomfortable emotions that are really hard to face. And she has found a way to describe the roots of some of that, where that comes from, where the sort of separation happens between yourself and the thing that is disgusting you, and how complex that is. And I think that that's fascinating, and I'm always trying to find the source of my own fascination with contradictions, with things that don't necessarily sit together, but that are tied intimately. And our relationship with the built world, my relationship with the built world, is incredibly complex because I love machines. I love them. I'm fascinated by them. When I rode a motorcycle, I lived on that motorcycle. I studied it intensely. I related it and its workings to the workings of my own body. I think refineries are just as fascinating. As much as I'm angered by what they do to us, in terms of pollution and what they do to people's lives, but yet I drive a car, and it's a gasoline-driven car. It is not an electric vehicle. So we live in these contradictions, the less morose things. Let's see, Terraforma. Terraforma is a book edited by 3 French people whose names I will not pronounce well. That addresses systems, that visualizes through really creative, wonderful maps how the non-human world exists and can exist despite us, and how we can live within the resources that are natural in a symbiotic way. The book actually illustrates these types of concepts. And then the other one that is huge for me is Island Zombie by Ronnie Horn, which is this incredible poetic collection of lists and these kind of bursts of moments that come from a particular part of their life, where they were on a motorcycle in the 70s. In Iceland, which they describe as a desert type of landscape. So it's about this navigating the isolation, the emotional isolation, but yet feeding from and figuring out how to survive in a physical and emotional desert. So yeah, those are three big ones for me, among others.
Great, thank you. We have time to open this up, but I'd love if anyone wants to ask a question or make an observation. I'd like to give you that space. Does anyone? Yeah.
I'll make one. It's not a question, it's more an observation, but I don't know, you said it took forever to come up with this name, but I thought it was great. Because Ellen, last week I asked you about it, and you said you thought it was perfect because all your art was healing. But if you look at triage, for every person you heal, there's someone else you let die. You have a whole wall of people who let die, and others tearing their skins and things like that.
Right.
So it seemed to me that would have been your idea from the start, so it really surprised me when you said that it came late.
Yeah, that's true. I perhaps was not focused on the struggle in that conversation of getting to the title. But yeah, both Heather and I were speaking about, when we were talking about the title, we were speaking about how our work addresses themes of wounding and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the work is about the wound and looking towards the healing, and sometimes the work is about healing. And the shadow side of healing, of course, is that there's a wound. So, yeah. But yeah, it was a struggle, and I'm sorry if I didn't highlight that last week.
No, well chosen.
Tom, you're a writer. You understand writer's block.
Yes.
I mean, it's something that is, when you're trying to force yourself to think of something brilliant, and it has to be brilliant, it has to be perfect, it has to be something no one else has done. That's like when you're not going to come up with anything.
Right.
There's a lot of pressure.
But you did. You did.
Eventually.
Who else? Yeah, Cece.
Can you talk a little bit about your research process, both in how you express all of these deep sort of things that you're exploring, whether it's inter-species relationships or pollution and its effect on people and spaces? Because you definitely, it's so clear how deeply you think, but it's also clear like how strong your skills are with the materials you're using to express it. So I'm curious, just tell me a little bit about your research.
Well, it's not something that's necessarily thought out in advance or planned. It comes from a curiosity. This project is called the Brio Memory Project. It was informed by I learned that there was a really particularly devastating Superfund site across the street from the site where Ellen and Cindy Clement, who's back there, and two other lovely people, Kathy Kaiser and Renata Lucia. We all were having another exhibition about environmental issues, and I just became incredibly fascinated with the fact that there were these gigantic retention ponds, across the streets from this college that were holes where there was once a subdivision that was torn down because people were so sickened by a refinery that was right next to it in the 90s. And so the curiosity in that, it's this kind of like, sick fascination with this just weird history. And that kind of curiosity leads to all kinds of things. It leads to, at least to just being obsessed and digging into the things. And then that process opens up, all these other trajectories and relationships, and on it goes. Yeah.
I love that question just because so often in my life I have to defend the research practices of artists as being rigorous. And I hear you saying like this is kind of a sick fascination or a thing that pulls you in. That's what I think a lot of research comes out of in all fields. And so when I talk to scholars in other disciplines to make this case for kind of the rigor of artistic research, it's that this fascination with questions isn't doesn't have the guardrails of disciplinary boundaries for artists. And that's such an incredible resource for the world, because often once you get within the disciplinary boundaries, that can be a barrier to the depth of research that we actually need across fields. And so I'm really grateful for that question. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah. Anyone else who'd like to jump in?
I have a comment. So this past weekend that we were not here, a friend of mine who works in security in refineries came all the way from Spain, and I brought him here to the show. And he was all curious and very interested on this site. And he was started to ask me questions about how did this happen? How was this such a horrible place of contamination, pollution, and all of that? Just wanted to comment that because you were in the group.
I mean, one thing that I want to point out in honor of the direction that I want to take this project, it started off with the Rio Superfront site, but, honestly, there are so many sites that are toxic, and most of them are located next to marginalized neighborhoods where there's not a lot of power, there's not a lot of adequate representation politically. There are good grocery stores, or it's difficult, right? And there's not a whole lot of monitoring going on, with the levels of pollution in the air, and if it is, it's messed with. It's another story.
Yeah.
But this, I found out through a wonderful writer and visual artist named Willow Curry, who she grew up in Fifth Ward, very near the Houston Wood Processing Works site, which is now owned by Union Pacific Railroad. And there's a huge problem. Probably everybody here knows that there's a huge problem with people coming up with cancer as a result of creosote. Well, I found out, thanks to a climate justice colleague, that there are toxins that were imported from the Brio Superfund site and two other Superfund sites. Actually, the other one was Dixie Oil Processors, which is right next to that. Waste oils were brought in to the wood processing site and mixed with the creosote in a creosote to make a creosote extender. So there's this direct link between these two sites that serves to kind of, there's a bridge there between these two very different populations and their suffering. And, my goal is to look for these bridges between these different populations that have suffered. I mean, it might be a 5 or 10 year long project. But, there are things that we have in common, despite our differences in our backgrounds. And I really want to pour a lot of time into investigating that. And if anybody has their industrial toxic waste stories, and they would like to be part of this, I'm always looking for more stories to represent in this project. So I'm, seriously, I have a notebook. I have a QR code that'll take you to a website where you can submit a story online. Whatever. Just get in touch with me because I want it to keep going.
So both of y'all's work deals with different interpretations of significance of place, particularly in Houston, the things that this place does to us or structures our lives or impacts them negatively or positively. How do you think Houston's lack of zoning regulations has affected your work?
Houston's lack of what?
Zoning regulations? No zoning. We could have so many different things next to each other.
Sure.
That part of our landscape, does that affect either of y'all's work metaphorically or directly?
That sounds like it might be more, affecting your area of research, but, but it I don't know.
Well,
I have an appreciation for the lack of zoning myself because I appreciate just this big mass of ball of humanity and everything. That's just what Houston is. But certainly there are some problems that arise with that. But I don't think I can speak very succinctly to
I
that.
think
or
of your
very-
mycelium.
I'm sorry.
I think of your mycelium that you make. You know,
Sure.
she makes these lovely, gigantic installations collaborative with, you know,
With Kathy Kaiser. Yeah.
that are just these really beautiful tangles of threads made out of organic material. And you could look at it that way, I guess, you know? I think it's a double-edged sword, you know? I think that a lot of people have lost their homes as a result of lack of zoning. I think that property taxes have gone up in so many different parts of this city that even if you want to stay put, you know, how do you afford that if you've been living, you know, for decades or generations in a place? And that's really awful. And I also think that it's awful that there doesn't seem to be a lot of connection or thought behind the developments and the places that these developments occupy. They just kind of demolish something, erase it, they erase the history, and then something pops up. If you've got the fight in you, you can stick around, I guess, is the upside of that. But I mean, I don't know. I think, I mean, Houston's pretty weird for that reason, you know? And it's, you can have a lot of creativity, you can do some interesting things with that, but there's a price for.
You're speaking about, or bringing up the mycelium project, made me think about something that actually my husband and I were talking about the other day, and made me think about our bayou systems, because I was thinking, you know, mycelium is connection and so many points of connection. And before our show, Jake Eshelman and Margot Crump had a lovely show here about our bayous. And bayous are connection points as well, right? And sort of structure our city in their own way. And what my husband and I were talking about was how when we first moved here, we've been here 10 years, we would go to the water often, and we haven't been doing that as much. And, you know, he made this sort of poetic observation, as poets will do, that our shores, you know, Houston is a port city, and our shores touch the water that then potentially goes out to the entire world, because our water is all interconnected, right? And so what we put into our water and what we, how we interact with our bayous, which flow out to the water, the big water, you know, impacts possibly the entire world. And there again, it's that spiritual connection of honoring how interconnected we are. And I don't know if that speaks specifically to your zoning, but you know, it's that same thing. It's like Houston is just chaos sometimes, but within the chaos, there's many points of connection. And I think we have, I don't know, as I said earlier, I think Houston has a wealth of opportunities for us to engage, but because we are so busy traveling the many roads that connect us, it's easy for us to not see it or to forget it.
I want to pause the conversation here, not end it, but pause it and say thank you. Applaud Heather.